Good afternoon, everybody. You're listening to, and perhaps watching, Booklovers Corner, brought to you from Arrow Radio 92.7 FM here in the Wairarapa, New Zealand. And I believe we've got listeners all over the world, so welcome all of you. And we are kindly sponsored by Almo's Bookstore in Carterton here in the Wairarapa. Now, it's cold and it's winter and it's very miserable. And we have our two people to do our books today. One is Valda. Hello, Valda.
Hi, Maggie. Hi, listeners.
Hi, Valda. I've missed you out there. And we've got Jackie.
Hello, Valda. Hello, Valda, and hello, Margie.
Yes, hello, everyone. Now, because it's cold and miserable, we thought we should really go north. And today, Valda, you're going to be talking about authors from Iceland.
Yes, Iceland. I have extraordinarily fond memories of Iceland. I camped around Iceland for 3 weeks, circumnavigated Iceland camping in 1975. So that's over 40 years ago.
Don't say it. It's because we're all young chicks, you know. I mean,
dream on.
Yes.
And I went there because I had been travelling around Europe on my Ural Pass and youth hostel card, you know, with a backpack and 2 pairs of jeans and 2 T-shirts, as you did in those days. And I got so oppressed by civilization and people, and I just needed to get away. And so I got one of the, I think, probably first adventure companies that were around in those days, and went to Iceland because it had been recommended by a colleague of mine that I taught with in Christchurch. And I just loved it. I loved particularly the landscape. And it's a land, one of the books I bought while I was there was called Ice and Fire, and it's the story of Iceland told in many all sorts of, particularly the lands, focus on the landscape. And it's a very small country. Even now, it's only got a population of less than 350,000.
Gosh, that's about the size of its city.
Well, that's
Wellington.
Right. That's right.
Yep.
But in 1975, I took a lot of notes at the time, as is my wont. And at the time, the population was 200,000.
That's extremely small.
And so
yes.
It's almost doubled in the last sort of 40 years.
So is that 200,000, was that just in one city?
No, that's the whole of the country.
That's the whole country.
And the 350,000 is the whole of the country.
Okay.
Gosh, that's quite small.
It's a very small country.
Yeah, indeed.
And yet it has a mammoth literary background.
It's got stories.
It has got stories. Now, the first people...
It's all those long, dark nights, people sitting around telling stories.
Absolutely. It was first... people first went there in about the late 7th century, around about 874, around about then. And they think that the Icelandic sagas that some of us may have heard of started from the 2nd or 3rd generation of those early settlers to record their life. And their lives were mainly consisting of particularly fishing and farming. And in fact, when I was there in 75, that still was the case. It's only apparently since the late 90s that tourism it's become a destination in itself. Yep. But also, since I was there, when I was there, the first geothermal power station was in the process of being built. Mm-hmm. And there was some geothermal reticulation round Reykjavik. And I can remember, wonderful sort of dips in the hot pools and so on. But since then, I think it's just totally powered by geothermal energy. And the sagas that started from the early life of Iceland are still part of the school curriculum.
Right, so all children would know about
All
these
children
stories.
know
Yes.
them. And apparently, I was listening to a podcast, one of my favourite podcasts, Eleanor Wachtel, which is a Canadian broadcasting company, who does Writers and Company, and she was interviewing a writer called Helgeson. And he was saying he will read a saga every year just to refresh himself about the sagas.
Okay.
So it's still the sagas are still a living part of their culture. In addition, they actually have got a Nobel Prize for Literature. A guy, Haldor Laxness, in 1955 got the Nobel Prize for Literature. And so this country full of earthquakes and volcanoes and wind and glaciers, not very, very different from New Zealand
I was going
in
to say,
some
you
respects.
sounded like you were describing New Zealand.
Which is possibly why I connected with it
right,
when I went there.
Yes, a lot of German, glacier and thermal stuff.
But it's
happening.
not a wooded country, though,
It is
it?
not at all wooded.
No,
No.
that was
I
my
didn't
impression.
mention we went to one area which was wooded, but they're all very dwarf sort of trees.
Because they're very far
of
north.
They're very far north. I mean, we stood and we could see where the Arctic Circle was,
Okay.
sort of not far away. And it only gained its independence in 1944 from Denmark.
Oh, were they under Denmark?
So they
Okay,
were under
yes,
Denmark. And so they are a pretty, recent nation. And in addition, in 2008, you may recall that they had an economic meltdown which collapsed all their banks. But they seem to be recovering from that. And very interesting listening to people's opinion, Icelandic people's opinions of what happened there. So in that context, I want to talk about 3 Icelandic writers, crime fiction writers, one of which I knew beforehand, Indridason.
Yes.
I love his work and have read all his books.
Right.
But this is the latest, which I got out of the library recently.
And it's called
The Shadow Killer.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Now, up till this one, most of Indridason's novels have had a particular detective called I've lost my track. Has had a particular detective in it, which has tracked his life story, which is fraught. And one of the things about all of the crime stories that I've read from Icelandic, and often the Scandi Noir series, there are a lot of fraught backgrounds.
Yeah, I think it's in most detectives, yes.
But then I think we're not too different either.
No,
So
I
think
suppose. I guess for me that there comes a point where it gets beyond plausible and becomes to the point where you think, how can this person possibly function if they are so...
Wow.
Their background is so dreadful.
Yes.
Anyway,
wow,
go.
that yes, I'll be coming up to that. So he has had some pretty grim stories, and tracing this particular detective of his, and the detective lost a brother in his youthful and when he was young, in one of the many snowstorms. They were in a farming community. They went out to gather the sheep. One of them got lost and was never found. And that has been a lodestone throughout all of his books.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Erlendur is his name. And I just got very fond of him.
Yes.
And so I was really disappointed to find the Shadow Killer is not of... you got hints in the last one that, that was he had retired and
They didn't kill
he
him
was
off.
out of it. They didn't kill him off.
No,
He
for-
just retired
Yes.
into the rural background.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
sort of.
Well, that's nicer than when they try and kill them off and then they suddenly
Then they have-
resurrect themselves.
Exactly.
You know,
Yes.
the classic was
But I
Sherlock
think
Holmes.
that,
Yeah.
but if you're having serial killers, perhaps in a place like Iceland, that they would notice the drop in population very quickly.
Well, there's other things too about having a small population like that. And those of us who come from regional New Zealand know about the black underbelly of things a lot more perhaps than you do if you live in
In a big
the-
city or something,
in
yes.
Yes.
Yes, the cleanliness of a city,
Oh, yes.
the supposed cleanliness of a city. This particular one, The Shadow Killer, is actually based in World War II. And I think the other thing I love about these books is you learn a lot about the history.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Iceland, although it was, Denmark was Denmark's property,
Yes.
the Americans came in, and then the Brits came in and took over, and it was and there was an enormous lot of tension between the two, and so that tension, as well as the possibility of spying for Germany, because people from Iceland had strong connections with Denmark and perhaps with Germany too.
Yes.
So, you've got a lot of dynamics in that situation that you don't have in many others.
Yes.
And so this one is a Reykjavik wartime mystery.
Oh, okay. That sounds
And-
good. Is it a murder?
It is a murder.
Okay.
And it's a travelling salesman is found murdered in a basement flat, killed by a bullet from a Colt 45. The police initially suspect a member of the Allied occupation
Oh,
force.
well, there you go.
But it's much, much more complex than that. But it's well worth a read.
And good reading, easy read?
Easy read.
When I say easy, you're gripped and you'll continue reading
and with
it. Yes, okay.
the ghastly weather we've been having, a day in front of the fire sees you almost finishing that.
And a bowl of chocolates next to you?
The other one, the second writer, whom I've not actually come across before, is Ragnar Jonasson, and the book is called The Darkness. Now, he's always been fascinated by writing, and he, in fact, his earliest writing was, in fact, translating from English into Icelandic 14 Agatha Christopher novels.
I loved that little piece of information, Val. I love to know things like
Isn't
that.
it? I mean,
Brilliant.
and so he's obviously got a passion
Yes.
there. There's no doubt about that. And I'm
For
sure
mystery and yes.
he no doubt picked up a lot of ideas from
Yes.
that particular
That's lovely.
exercise or challenge. This particular book is like a reverse series. This is the last in a series, but I think it's the first to be translated into English. And so we will get the earlier ones sort of down the track,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Right.
Yes, I understand that.
And so, and it's focused on a detective inspector, Hulda Hermannsdottir. And she is a woman not to be trifled with.
Oh, she's 64.
She
so
is 64. She has a long and also fraught history. But what got me, and I felt really quite passionate about this, is she knew she was coming up to, retirement.
Yes.
She's 64, on to retirement. She went in one day and her boss told her he didn't need her anymore, out of here. And they've got a young one who took over her office, I think, before the day was out. So it was an immediate out. And that's a pretty shocking thing,
is,
even
yes.
for those of us who've experienced that, have got a little bit of lead time. But if you have no lead time and you're not psychologically prepared for it, it's quite tricky. So I was interested in that aspect. But she was told that, as a sop, that she could pick any cold case to work on for 2 more weeks.
Just keep her busy, but not
To
really.
keep her busy,
just
and now if
busy-
everybody's
just busy
here,
working,
just
go
go
away.
away, go away,
Yes.
don't disturb us.
And don't be a
And what
problem.
she did was she took a case that had really interested her and which she thought had been not done well.
Mm-hmm.
And it involved a young woman who was found dead on rocks in a bay nearby. And it was a woman who no one cared that much about because she was, in fact, a Russian who was waiting to be granted asylum. And it's the sort of story you can think is being replicated around the planet.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
On the borders of Mexico and the United States, in Europe, all the countries in Europe.
Yeah.
And because she was an outsider, her death was ruled as a suicide, and it was a very slapdash investigation. Then she started asking questions. She began to realise that there was something more to this case, and it was something darker and more bloody. And this was not the only, what she found out, was not the only young Russian woman to disappear from the hostel as they waited for asylum. And when her own force tried to put brakes on the investigation, she was determined to finish it. And she just had days, but she was given this time. She just had days to discover the truth.
But she was very experienced.
She was very experienced. And yes, she did find the perpetrator of the death, well, how these two women came to be murdered.
So also another gripping, easy,
gripping,
good read.
Good read.
Thick book.
Thick book, here we are.
When was this one published?
No, I haven't got it because I had to take it back to the library.
Okay.
But they're all this year.
Okay,
they're all very
all
recent.
this year.
Okay, so we're doing some recent books.
Yeah.
Now,
And the third one,
sorry, yes.
got 5 minutes,
Yep.
have I? Third one is another writer new to me because I was discussing this with a friend who was up from Wellington recently, and she was saying, oh, no, there's an Icelandic female crime writer. I said, oh. And so I went in and did some exploring, and Ursa, I went and onto Google how you pronounce that, and I listened to 3 different variations on how to pronounce it. Ursa, it all sounded the same to me. So Ursa, Sigurdardottir.
Such names. Such
And
difficult names.
I sat down one of the recent days, Friday was really wet and grotty, and I finished it.
Wow, in a day.
It's in a day.
Yes.
It's,
Also a crime story?
also a crime story. So she's called the Icelandic Queen of Nordic Noir.
Wow.
Is that what we call it? Okay,
there
Nordic
you go.
noir.
There's a recommendation.
So I recommend all 3. And she was born in 1963. She is, in fact, a practicing engineer.
Heaven's sake.
So it reminds me of that wonderful woman, Fred Vargas, in the Parisian writer, who was actually an archaeologist. So you've got some wonderful women writers who are having really high-powered full-time careers.
And they still manage to write.
But they still manage to write,
that's interesting.
which makes one feel, quite
Inadequate.
Never mind.
But we read them still, yes.
But we're appreciative of people.
Oh,
who can do that.
absolutely.
Yes.
So this particular one is called The Legacy, and it starts off with a prologue of 3 children being orphaned, or they had to be adopted and sorted, and would they be adopted together or separately, and they ended up being adopted separately. And then you have throughout the book series of interconnecting pieces, but you're not sure where the bits of the jigsaw connect.
Is it set in modern times?
It's all set. Yes, this one's set in modern times, but it also goes back to when you are in a small community and the outcomes that you have when you have got a small community, and it is quite. I don't know, very challenging, but very
Gripping. Should we call it gripping?
Yes, it's hard to describe it. So just briefly, to finish off, The Legacy is the first instalment of a fantastic new series, and I can see how it is the beginning of a new series, featuring psychologist Freya and the police officer Officer Hulda. The only person who might have the answers to a baffling murder case is the victim's 7-year-old daughter, found hiding in the room where her mother died, and she's not talking. Newly promoted, out of his depths, Detective Hulda turns to Freya for her expertise with traumatised young people. Freya, who distrusts police in general, and Hulda in particular, isn't best pleased, but she's determined to keep little Margaret safe. It may prove tricky. The killer is leaving them strange clues, but can they crack the code? And if they do, will they be next? So it's a gripping
mystery
one.
within a mystery, yes.
Freya is distrusting the police, and Hulda in particular, because she in fact she's trying to find a partner online, and Hulda comes saying that he is a cabinet maker from some remote, or a builder from some remote part of Iceland. So when she goes into this professional situation where he in fact is the policeman.
Oh, telling stories online.
So
yes.
it's,
yes.
you know.
You'll always be found out.
Or especially at a place where there are only 250,000.
You know, so it's, you've
Yes.
got in every...
It's like trying to have a secret in Wellington.
But now, Valda, it's interesting you found 3 authors. They all write crime.
Yep.
And they're all Icelandic, and they're probably recently. There
Yep.
must be a crime wave of sweeping those Nordic countries, because we've got a lot. I'm going to talk later on about another one. So there seems to be a lot of crime, or how can I say, fascination with crime.
Well, I think if we, I may have mentioned to you, Margie, that when I was at Yarns and Barnes recently, and Rosie Fenwick was there launching her Death Actually, following the first publication of her first publication, which was Hot Flush. She'd recently returned from the London Book Fair, where discussion was about crime fiction being far the most read of all fiction. And the
Yes, I can
theory
understand that. Yep.
suggested that it was probably something that provided certainty in an uncertain world. There was goodies and a baddie or two, and a system setting out to get the baddie.
Yes, and usually
so,
a problem solving.
Yes.
Yeah, and a resolution that's comfortable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that provides some sort of certainty in what has become for all of us, I think, an uncertain world. But
yes, but it's
maybe.
I've always thought of them as problem solving, because a good writer keeps you guessing.
Yes.
And also throws in a lot of red herrings, which sometimes is a bit irritating. But yes, and it's wonderful if you suddenly halfway through say, aha, I think.
It really depends on the quality of the writing.
yes.
It's really
That's
interesting.
Absolutely critical.
No, I quite
This
agree
one,
there.
the legacy. The others I sort of got, but this one I didn't get till the end.
Okay, so
Really?
it was a
Yeah.
big surprise.
So it was a big surprise.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, Elmo's have got copies both of several Inderson books and also Jonason's The Darkness
Okay.
and The Light. They are books that are available in the library.
Well,
Gosh.
I have marked it to have a look on the
Yes,
library.
no, that's great. Well, I think we should have a little break to take a breath before we move on, and maybe get a cup of tea, something warm after all those Icelandic things. And I'm going to play. I couldn't find Grieg or Sibelius or York, so I'm afraid we're with Enya, who's Irish. So we'll go there. All right, let's go.
Let me say, let me crush upon your shoulder. Let me reach,
Well, welcome back to Book Lovers Corner. We've had a bit of music to sort of give us time to get your cup of tea or whatever. And our second reviewer is Jackie. Jackie, you doing one called No Way to Treat the First Lady. Now,
Yes.
And that's by Christopher Buckley.
Christopher Buckley is an American writer. He's also an essayist. He's a journalist. He's an author. He's quite well known there. He was born in 1952. He was the son and only child of William Buckley, who's a right-wing conservative writer and a founder of the magazine The National Review. Now, I shouldn't like Christopher Buckley
From that
because-
background.
just purely because of his politics and his background. But because he's such a clone of his father, but he's such a good writer, and his father was such a good writer. And so Christopher Buckley I also can put up with because he voted for Obama. So I think that's a plus
that's
for him.
interesting.
Yes, which put him offside, as you can imagine.
with his father.
With his father, with the whole family. It was quite an interesting read, actually, finding that out about him. I think he went back to the fold eventually, but there you go. He's written lots of books satirising all aspects of American life, politics, big business, particularly the tobacco industry. He's got it in for them, which is
And that's
really
interesting,
good.
yes.
And religion. Now, I find his books laugh out loud funny. They're very irreverent, and they're spot on in the self-serving, self-deceiving, and totally venal characters that people them. And it's such good writing. That's the thing about it. It's not shallow. It's so deep. It's really good. Anyway, this one, No Way to Treat the First Lady. The president, Ken McCann, is dead in bed, and it looks like murder. The weapon could be the antique silver spittoon that is used as a waste paper basket in the presidential bedroom. Now, the president has the silver mark Revere on his forehead, which is embedded because the spittoon
Hit him on the
forehead.
head. Okay.
Yes. And this is for Paul Revere, who was a famous
Oh, Paul,
patriot.
Yes.
Who
But it
rode
would have been
to-
in reverse, wouldn't it?
Pardon?
It would have been in reverse.
Yes, it was in reverse.
So you had to hold a mirror up to see what was written.
But that's,
Okay.
Yes, but it was that was Paul Revere was a famous silversmith who was also the patriot who wrote 1775. He rode off to alert the forces about the Brits. The First Lady, Beth McMahon, who's loathed by all, and nicknamed First Lady Beth Mac, is charged with assassination. Now, they were known to have had a fiery marriage, and throwing things was quite common when they were fighting. Ken was a notorious philanderer, and on the last night of his life, he had been philandering with his friend, a B-grade actress whose husband is a major donor in Ken's political party and to his presidential campaign, in the Lincoln bedroom just down the hall, in the total disregard for the agreement he had with Beth about not doing it when she was at home. Beth hires high-flying Boyce Baylor as her lawyer. His nickname is Shameless.
Shameless.
Shameless. 25 years ago, Ken, Beth and Shameless had all been students together at Georgetown Law School. In fact, Boyce and Beth had been engaged. But when Ken came on the scene, Beth had dumped Boyce and taken up with Ken. Boyce had been waiting for an opportunity to pay her back. Is this his opportunity?
To frame the first
Exactly.
lady.
Who knows? And he's supposed to be her defence lawyer. All the players are hiding dirty secrets and are desperately trying to avoid having them out in public, while at the same time trying to make money out of the whole situation.
Selling their story.
Just so American.
Yes.
Wanting to be on TV and to be
Yes.
on talk shows. The personal maid sold her story for a huge sum of money. It was enough to retire on. And on top of this is the stunningly complex American legal system. It's just never ceases to amaze and fascinate me, the system that they have. Anyway, so it's the backroom deals, the blackmailing. To paraphrase Christopher Buckley's own words, it seems sufficiently self-satirising so as not to need pointing up, because it was just the system itself satirises itself.
Okay.
It is so complex. They have the judges gavel banging every minute. There's lots of shouts of objection and overruled and withdrawn and and so on.
Have any of you ever been into a court?
Well, they don't have gavels here, and they don't have them in Britain
no, I was
either.
going to say, have you any of you? I don't think I've ever been in a court.
Yes, I have.
I've
yes.
been once. I had a friend who
I was a court clerk once, so I used to sit in courts.
Okay.
But no, they don't have gables here.
Yeah.
No, I've only been once because a friend of mine was a JP when I was over visiting her in Reading in England, and she was sitting. So that was my first and only time.
And they don't have gavels?
No.
Oh, how
If they want
interesting.
to, if they want to restore order, they just raise their voices, shout,
And everyone behaves.
and everyone
themselves.
behaves.
Okay.
But it's actually quite a boring process here. It's very dull because everybody has to speak very slowly for the stenographer to pick it up and for the recording and
Yes,
stuff. It's
okay.
quite dull.
So you've got the background of the American systems.
So the background is the American system, which is far more dramatic than ours. And because they have so many levels of appeal, they have so many ways of doing deals, so many plea bargains. We don't have that sort of thing,
Right.
at least not officially. I mean, there's clearly a bit of
Yes.
that goes on in the background, I'm sure, but not so openly as it is here. And this is the way things are done, and it's the way it's expected to be done.
Yes.
So they do deals with the prosecution, and they do deals, to try and reduce the sentence. I mean, she's
Yes.
been charged with assassination, which is,
Punishable by death.
well, pretty much, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Although this is in Washington, I don't think they have the death penalty there.
Yes, that's the other side. I mean, America is not one country.
No,
And
It's
political,
many countries.
yeah.
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
political, yes.
So what happens then, I'm not going to tell you any more about what
Yes,
happens
please don't
then,
spoil it, yes.
because it's just such a roller coaster.
Is it a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, do you think?
There is some of that. I would
Okay.
say that there may be a few people in Washington who might recognise themselves in that book. And I don't think he takes many pains to disguise some of them.
Right.
But I enjoy his writing because he's clearly in the know. He knows what he's writing about, and it's nice to be able to be at this distance from it. I mean, at the
Yes.
moment, for instance, he wrote a book in 1986. He wrote a novel called The White House Mess, and it really predicted a Trump-like president. Which is quite creepy.
Well,
I have not read that. I intend to get it out of the library and read it, but apparently that's what he did. He predicted that this could happen,
Yes.
and pretty much wrote the script for the president they've got now.
Maybe he reads it. Maybe our friend Mr. Trump reads it.
He doesn't read.
I don't think he doesn't read.
okay.
No,
He
he
doesn't
doesn't listen
read
either.
full
So there you go.
So-
But with this guy, I think he's for me. I think it's worthwhile reading because he's right there in the centre of these things, and he's amusing. He's got good insight, and funny. I just laugh.
How's he stayed alive?
Pardon?
How has he stayed alive?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
I mean, given the situation, I think that's a pretty tricky one to be.
Perhaps he's just very lucky.
Yes. Now, what else has he written? You said he's written.
Well,
for
I had
quite
another
some
book
time.
of his that I read last year, and this is called The Relic Master. And it's set in 1517 in the Holy Roman Empire, which is, as we
So
know,
very
we were told
different.
was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
Yes.
This was about Dismas, a former Swiss mercenary and monk. He's now a prosperous dealer in holy relics on his way back from the Basel Relic Fair with a goodly collection of bones for his clients. Now, he's got two main clients. He has Frederick the Wise, ruler of Saxony, and Albrecht, the Archbishop of Mainz. Both clients are in competition with each other over their collections. But they both have this in common. They both use the relics to help them sell indulgences to the faithful.
Yes.
Those,
Now, just
those
go a
get
little
out
bit
of
back
purgatory passes.
For those who don't know what a religious relic is.
Oh, well, they're bones of saints.
Yes, supposedly.
Yes. And quite often some of these saints end up having 6 legs and 25 hands because there are so many relics that have been proven to be of these particular
and they're
saints.
supposed to hold specific powers
Yes,
to
they
heal.
do.
And
Well, they do. Some of them do. Some of them have powers for healing, but some of them are just very influential in heaven and can get you out of purgatory, which is where you go to have your sins burned off before you go to heaven.
Now, what about indulgences? What?
The same thing. You get time off from purgatory.
But
with
you
an
buy
indulgence, yeah.
indulgences.
So you can pray for them or you can buy them.
Purgatory is
a place.
What happens before you go to hell?
No. If you go to purgatory, you're not going to hell. You've been a bit naughty, but not terribly naughty.
Oh, I see. So
And
it's a sort of middle ground.
Yes, but it's not on the way to hell.
Right.
If you get sent to purgatory, it means you just have to get all your sins burned off, and then you go to
So
heaven.
what happens if you get time? Oh, sorry. This is
if you get
time off purgatory because you've bought
you bought 200 years off. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do then?
You go to heaven.
Oh, so you can go from purgatory to heaven, but you can't go from purgatory to hell.
No, you go straight to
But
hell.
is that waiting ground?
Such is my ignorance.
Yes.
So it's like a kiddie prison.
Yes.
You know.
And the thing about Protestantism is when Luther decided up against the Catholic Church that indulgences were wrong. And that was one of his reasons to break.
That's what happens here. So it's a very lucrative business, relics, and they can recoup their outlay in one pilgrimage season with good marketing. So with pilgrims.
So selling of those religious things still goes on today.
Apparently
Yes.
so.
You know, when you walk
On the
anywhere.
Camino.
Yes, people
Very
make
much
money.
so.
Anyway, Martin Luther had been railing against this business and other church practices, and is just about to nail his 95 theses, wasn't it, or
on the
75, something
door.
like that, to the cathedral door. Dismas sees that his profitable business is under threat. So he and his good friend and drinking buddy, Albrecht Dürer, think up a scheme for one last hit that will keep them in luxury for their retirement. They will find the true shroud. It will be better than any other of the true shrouds, and its provenance will be impeccable. So that's what
the story is.
That's what they're going to do, yes. So they, together with an equally dodgy female accomplice, they set about it. And so they end up, at one point, they have to actually go into burgling the Archbishop's house to get a good look at his true shroud, because there are many true shrouds.
There are many true shrouds, that's right.
But they're going to have the one that's going to outshine the whole lot of them.
I know.
And they'll sell it, and then they'll be able to retire. So, I mean, I thought it was great reading for all those recovering Catholics brought up to believe in original sin, indulgences, purgatory, hell, the saintliness of popes and the other church fathers, which brings to mind the immortal words of Christopher Hitchens. The church fathers made damn sure there would be no church mothers.
Wow. That's true.
Just perfectly true.
Absolutely true.
But so he writes quite an eclectic kind
He
of
does.
different
That's
stories.
very
He
different.
does, yes. I think he's one of these people who's very widely read. This is my guess. And something just clicks
Sparks
in here. And he thinks, oh...
But isn't
and then
that,
follows it.
There's a female writer who, whenever there's something on the go, she writes a book. Jodie
Pico.
Yes, Bo Peacock.
She tends to write whenever there's some sort of fashion. Well, no,
It's usually a moral dilemma.
a
of
moral
some
dilemma
sort,
that's
isn't it?
happening
Yes.
at the moment, and then we'll get a book on it.
Yes. It's
which-
stem cell research.
Yes,
or
I
it's
find it very
transplants or
dissatisfying.
Or producing another baby
Yes,
to
yes.
provide
Whatever.
the heart
For-
for the
to
one
provide
that's
spare
ailing.
Are we
parts
dishing
for-
her
yeah.
at this point? We're dishing her. Yes. Okay.
I read a few of hers, and I found her very annoying. I wanted to smack her. She was very shallow.
Well, luckily we don't have any followers in this room, but she probably appeals to a great many people.
Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm
But-
sure she does.
But not for us at the moment. Yes. So, but just getting back to Buckley, is it?
Yes,
Buckley?
Christopher Buckley.
Christopher. So, how many books has he written?
He's written quite a few. I don't know for sure because I haven't counted them.
Okay.
But he's a very good satirist. And I then went and had a look at some other people. I'm not going to talk about, but Tom Sharp is another one.
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Tom
Yeah.
Sharp is just
Yeah.
brilliant. And I thought he'd died. It turns out he's not. He's still alive, and he actually churned out a book the other day, which
my
is quite
goodness.
Now, he writes about British things.
good. He
He's
writes,
English.
yes.
Yes.
Well, he's
He's
South
English.
African actually.
Oh,
and
Yes, he is a
Really?
South African.
And he started
I know.
off as writing
really?
about South African.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think he may have been told to leave, or at least
He
encouraged to
decided
leave
was
at the time.
Probably thought it was a bit hot around here.
Yes, he was encouraged to leave, and he went to England, and he writes about the English, particularly about their class system and their traditions
In England, yes.
In England,
Yes.
and they're usually around the aristocracy or the universities, because that was the other one he did.
Oh,
was,
that reminds me. Who was the other one that did a series on the universities, very tongue-in-cheek?
no.
Gone blank. You'll
No,
think
I've
of
gone
it
blank.
soon.
No.
Yes.
Well, he did the one about the English universities that I particularly liked was called Porterhouse Blue, and that was set in I don't know whether it was Oxford or Cambridge, but or one that was made up, but it was one of the colleges. And the other one that I had a DVD out the other day was called Blot on the Landscape.
yes,
And
yes,
Blot was
yeah.
actually played by David Suchet.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yes,
Yes,
and so
he's
there we
such a
go,
good
all these
actress.
little connections.
Yes.
So that's Christopher Buckley. I mean, I think he's good fun. I think he's worthwhile reading. I wouldn't read them one after the other.
Yes, but they're in
Maybe,
between.
in between other books.
Maybe in between
Yeah.
those Icelandic
Exactly.
dark
In between
ones.
you
Yes.
Nordic noir people, you need to read a little light relief, and you learn a little history, because some of these things I found quite interesting too, that there were little
Yes.
bits and pieces that he had put into this book, and I went off and Googled and thought, oh, that's interesting, isn't
I
it?
mean, I think
Yes.
that's what's wonderful about even reading the Nordic, whatever, Scandi noir. You know, it's learning the history.
Yes, and the other country lives, and
yes.
you know, we spoke in our interval when you were all listening to that lovely music, why Russian is mentioned, Russian crime is mentioned, but since the opening of the Soviet Union, there has been an influx into other countries of Russian gangs and
Very
criminal
unpleasant.
activity, and particularly in women, which are for prostitution.
Yes.
So yes, and drugs.
Yes.
Yes, which
Thank
is
you.
thing. So that sounds super. So we're going to keep those in mind.
Yes.
And I have done a little bit on our favourite Henning Mankell, who wrote all the Wallander series. I always used to say wa, but it's a va. Wallander.
Which is probably how it's supposed to be
Yes,
pronounced.
but you know, I don't read as much as I used to, but I now do audiobooks. And audiobooks take much longer to listen to than reading. But the one I I've most recently listened to was called The Man from Beijing. Now, it's one of his later books, and he has passed away. I mean, he's no longer with us. And he wrote numerous books. I didn't realize he wrote for the stage. He wrote articles. He got involved with going out to Mozambique, which I found very interesting, because he set up a drama school in Mozambique.
Really?
Yes, that's what I mean. It's sort of really
bizarre.
weird. So he's Swedish. So he's up there in the cold, so maybe he liked that warmth of Mozambique. But he wrote this book called The Man from Beijing, and I found it actually parts of it I couldn't put together until I'd actually read a bit of his history, because I couldn't quite work out what he was getting at. But it starts with a dreadful murder in a little village in Sweden up north, where the whole village is murdered. And why was this murder? And the police come in and they kind of look for the wrong person, put it as simple as that, and they do arrest somebody who's wrong. But there's one woman who is a judge who decides this doesn't sound right, and her connection was that she'd been fostered by one of those families. And then she starts to do research into it, and she meets up, and then the story takes on about 3 different stories. And one is about a Swedish family that went out to America, and one of the men becomes foreman when they're building the railway between San Francisco and the East. And he is very cruel and terrible to Chinese particularly. And then there comes a story about the Chinese man who was on that railway, and he ends up trying to get back to Beijing, but he ends up in New York, and he gets a boat, and on the boat there are Swedish missionaries. So there's another connection with the family and Sweden. So slowly there's a little threads are starting to build. I find it quite difficult to follow at times.
Did they all eventually come
yes,
together
they do.
and it all made sense?
And that's what makes sense in the end. So
okay.
you have to have patience, read through it. At one stage, there's always this Chinese going on in the background, because remember, it's a man from Beijing. There's in modern day, there's someone who goes out to Mozambique, to Zambia, not Zimbabwe, Zambia, and they are talking about the Chinese who are building and influencing Africa. And I couldn't work out, because we do know the Chinese have been looking at Africa for a long time. And I did say
more than just looking at.
well, that's what I couldn't understand.
There's quite a lot of quite a lot of presence there.
Yes, but I didn't quite understand. And the theory behind this was that the Chinese are outrunning their land space in China and are going to send their poor to live in Africa, to this lovely fertile land. And I thought, okay, fertile land. I've seen a lot of empty land there too. Doesn't mean to say it's fertile. Anyway, it all starts to tie up in the end. It is a long book, but it's actually very interesting, because he brings in modern day politics, some about China, quite a lot about Chinese politics at the moment, of how things have changed since Mao, the growth of the modern Chinese industrialists and the corruption that goes on. And then it all goes back to Sweden again in the end.
Take a huge sweep.
It's a huge sweep, and that's why I say there were parts, and because I listen, and sometimes I listen when I go to bed, and then I fall asleep, and so I have to retrace steps. But yes, it has a lot in it. It has a lot about China, modern China, but it also has a lot about missionaries, about building the railway, and how many people did die building those railways, and the treatment. So he has quite a moralistic stance, which I found quite interesting, because it's a murder story.
He really wanted to say something.
Yes, I wondered, there was something going on.
More than just another thriller.
Yes, it was more than just another thriller. It had a lot going on in it. So yes, I would imagine it's not an easy read, because I think it has too much in it. Yeah. But being one of he writes well, and I find his writing pretty good. Now, recently I had also listened to, I didn't realise it was the last of the Wallander series, which was called, no, it was his last one. What was it called? Not The Pyramid. The Troubled Man.
Oh.
Yes. And The Troubled Man, I forgot, having watched the TV series, was when Wallander gets dementia.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. And, we were talking about how do you write off...
Like his father.
Yes, Wallander's father had dementia. And it starts, I think the story starts where he leaves his gun on a restaurant table.
Oh, yes.
You remember that story?
Yes, I remember
and
that one.
And they ask, why did you do it? And he can't remember.
Yes.
And for those of us who might be reaching that age, I thought, I could imagine, not that I carry a gun, but, leave your purse behind, leave something behind. And so the Troubled Man was actually also about Sweden and what had happened with the Americans and spying and all sorts of things. So he obviously goes into detail about what's going on in the north, the Swedes, and the politics that go on behind the scenes. So if you like his Wallander series, I would say read some of his other books. They're really worthwhile. There were about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Wallander books. I can only remember about 4 or 5 of the stories. Have you read them all? I remember the one he wrote about somebody going to South Africa, and they did do a TV thing of it, which was actually highly improbable, but we won't go down, because very often they glamorize things.
Yes.
And it just doesn't fit.
No.
But yes, as I say, he does tend to take some political stance somewhere along the line, or moralistic, somewhere along. Have you read them all, Valda?
Yep.
With the TV series, that's quite an old TV series. So did they ever redo them, or just?
Well, there's 2 series. There's the Swedish series, and then there's the British series or the English series.
Right. Okay.
Where the actor whom I've been trying to think of while Marky's been talking.
Yes, and I've been trying to think of. He's very well known.
Who is?
He's a Shakespearean actor.
Shakespearean actor, absolutely.
Blonde curly hair.
I last saw him in The Winter's Tale.
Okay.
Yes.
On the movies. He's just
and that was a very good series.
Well, I saw him, this particular British actor who plays Wallander in the British series, doing an interview with Wallander, with Henning Mankell.
Oh, right.
And it was really interesting because, of course, they both come from acting theatrical backgrounds.
Yes.
And so it was an hour-long interview. It was really, really interesting and well worthwhile.
Yeah.
You might be on YouTube, I don't know.
It's actually, as we talk, I think if you're interested in a particular writer, go and look up where they come from, how they got into writing, what are their themes. I mean, both of you have mentioned the backgrounds, and I think that's really, really interesting. Well, I think we're getting towards the end. I know our TV might end up quite quickly, but we can go on chatting a bit more. So if you had to say, of these writers, you would all give them a good go? You'd say it's worth it?
I would. I'm not a great fan, excuse me, of, as I said before, of Nordic noir, partly because the ones that I have tried, the translations have let them down probably, because I just found the English too clunky and I couldn't get enough into the story or the gory gruesomes.
They tend to be very gruesome. I find that
they do tend to be very gruesome, and I don't mind that normally. But
Okay.
sometimes I think the writing is more important. The English has to be good in order for me to really maintain any interest in it, and they haven't always gripped me. So yes, I always try them, and I'll certainly try the couple that you've mentioned because I like the sound of them. But I have to say that I've never been much of a fan of Henning Mankell's books.
Okay.
Because I found them quite difficult. The
Well, he
English is not
jumps
that
around
good.
quite a lot, I must admit.
And the English is
So
not
the
good
book
enough.
you covered was Christopher...
Was Christopher Buckley, the No Way to Treat the First Lady.
Right.
And the other one I mentioned of his was The Relic Master.
The Relic Master. So very different.
The first one was published in 2002, so it's not a new book. And the second one was published in 2015.
Right.
So it's fairly
Good.
new.
Well, thank you. And Valda, you did 3 books.
Yes. Arnold Indridason, The Shadow Killer,
Yes.
and the one I haven't got to show you because it's back at the library was Ragnar Jonasson, and his was called The Darkness, and then Ursa Sigurðardóttir, The Legacy.
Excellent. Thank you. And the one I did was Henning Mankell, The Man from Beijing. Now we're coming to an end, so I want to, for the next 2 programs, they've been pre-recorded, while 2 of us will be floating around the world. So Valda, travel well.
And Margie, you travel well too.
Thank you. And I know you're not going away, Jackie, but you will be coming up to Carterton.
Jackie is, yes, she's coming up to have a holiday in Carterton.
That's right.
Yes,
With
yes.
plenty of firewood, Jackie.
And I'm very grateful.
Thank you. So we leave you now from Booklovers Corner, and we've been kindly sponsored by Elmo Books of Carterton, and I hope you have some good winter reading. Thanks, everybody.